This is fiction and in no way representative of the actual history of trains. The train was originally invented in the year of 1873 as an affordable replacement for human drawn carriages, which were themselves a hilarious replacement for the horse drawn carriage made purely for entertainment purposes. A few years later, almost everybody started painting their trains red, because red is speed. Now, it should be noted that in the year of 1880, a growing number of concerned citizens complained about the small size of trains, stating higher efficiency at a larger scale. Trains were around the size of a water bottle at these times and could only pull around 200 tons. Nothing important happened for the next 20 years or so. Nothing at all. They didn't change anything. And then, at some point in the later months of 1901, the trains went from coal to steam power, allowing for cleaner emissions and driving prices even lower. You may be getting bored at this point, but I assure you these details are essential and only the bare minimum. And on the topic of essential details, the next great change happened only a year later when the aforementioned size adjustments reached the final stages of development, and the wheels now ranged in size from 1 diameter to 10 kilometers. With the engines themselves, that being the main portion of the train, now being large enough to pull over 400 million pounds. In other words, the trains were now the size of elephants. This may sound like a very strange size ratio, but at the time, it was the most efficient design. The next decade is likely the most interesting for the trains themselves, as the growing number of anti train organizations rose up and other things happened. In 1903, the Human Workers Ethics Committee derailed 2 luxury cabins in a month, and another group, who is probably less important, derailed over 3,000 material transfers in a day. In 1904, it became illegal to have a train in your house, punishable by death or a fine of $14, depending on the mood of the local sheriff. And in 1905, multiple train producers go bankrupt after a whole year of losing their highest percentage of buyers, farmers, who had just invented tractors, which replaced trains, which replaced human-drawn carriages, which replaced horse-drawn carriages. Yeah. In 1906, the Church of Trains is founded and rapidly gains a cult following, with a number of members gaining high government positions. In 1907, all anti-train laws are stricken from existence and replaced with obscenely pro-train legislation. An example being trains' voting rights, even though they are entirely and irrefutably inanimate. For some reason, in 1908, prohibition happens, and it also makes trains across the world turn sentient all at once. And they can vote now, I guess, except for in 1910. Sentient trains were now the dominant species across the planet, and humans had become a subjugated work species with no rights, effectively reversing the roles until 1913, when pro-human trains began a human sanctuary in the middle of the ocean and started herding humans there for protection, or they would have if the trains hadn't suddenly gone back to being inanimate objects again. Thus ended the most peculiar 10 years of the history of trains. And now, with a severely low population and a new awareness of the capability of spontaneous sentience in everyday objects, humanity slowly recovered with a newfound, profound, and almost universal fear of trains, leading to vast legislation to prepare military responses for any further sentient objects. Now, it should be stated that trains were at this point done with major changes. However, their aesthetics and convenience features would change drastically over the next century. For example, in 1944, trains were made more blocky and aerodynamic. And by 1966, self-driving technology becomes fully realized on trains, allowing companies to save an estimated $100 trillion annually not paying the swaths of people required to drive a train. In 2015, the trains regained sentience for a week, explaining that they live in a parallel universe where they are the dominant species and live in a near utopia, save for their failed attempts at time travel, which is the cause of the train's sentience. And in 2022, Russ is discovered.